Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Fixing Diablo 2. Today, we're going to be going over some of the skills that have been lost sheep in the wilderness. And to clarify, and I'm going to say this every single episode, I don't think Diablo 2 is broken. I think Diablo 2 is nearly perfect. But what I do think is that there are certain skills within the Diablo 2 trees that just don't work. And no matter how hard people try to make builds around these skills, they just can't because they suck. Today we're going to be covering an interesting topic. That is conversion to element skills. There is a large number of conversion to element skills, and we could even put in Berserk here. Although Berserk I don't really feel like is broken, and we'll talk about that as well. And you might be wondering why Vengeance isn't on the list, because Vengeance is not a conversion. And we'll be talking about that as well. So far we have Fist of Fire, which is an assassin skill. We've got Cold Fire Arrow, we've got Frenzy, Lightning Bolt, and we have Berserk. All of these are conversion skills. And what do I mean by conversion skill? Well, if we take a look at the tree, what you'll see is that we have skills like Cold Arrow. Cold Arrow specifically says that it will convert 15% of my damage, my physical damage, to elemental damage. Now, one of the problems with this, and if we beef it up to max, you'll see that it goes up to 53%. One of the problems with this is that conversion of physical damage to an elemental source has many drawbacks. There are quite a few of them, actually. Number one, Life Leech no longer works or works at a diminished capacity. All right. Number two, Mana Leech no longer works or works at a diminished capacity. Number three, Life Tap works at a diminished capacity. Or stops working entirely if the physical damage reaches 0. And we kind of have to add that in here. Hold on. So we're just going to add that in for all three of these. So we already have 3 problems. So a skill like Cold Arrow is already removing large amounts of Life Leech, Mana Leech, and Life Tap. Number 4, and this is another interesting one, another bad thing that the conversion skills do, is they generally do not add damage. This is a big one, and it's actually probably one of the reasons why they are so bad, is that they don't actually add damage. And you might be asking me what the hell I'm talking about because you don't really understand. And let me see if I can clarify myself. So if I have 10,000 physical damage and I use Cold Arrow at its current level, which is currently a 53% reduction, all right, or 53% conversion, that means that we're going to take our 10,000 and we're going to subtract 53%, which, if we run that on a calculator, which I don't even have to because it's only 10,000, but let's just do it for the sake of argument. So 53%, which is 5,300, right? So I have a leftover damage of 4,700 physical, right? Then I also have the 5,300 cold, right? So I have now converted my physical to cold, but in the process, I have gained basically nothing. Now, there is a small amount of cold damage that is attached to the skill, and if you build the skill, and if we, let's do this real quick just for the fun of it. Let's go ahead and reset our girl here. Let's put in 20 points in the cold arrow and 20 points in the ice arrow. Let's put enough strength in dex so we can actually equip our equipment. All right. And now you can see it adds 411 to 437 cold damage. So in the grand scheme of things, if we had 10,000 physical damage and it was being converted, we're still technically getting a grand total of 10,000 damage. which means that nothing has been added. Then the skill itself gives us 411 to 437. To 437, right? Which means that we have like a total of 10,437, even if we want to take the maximum number, right? Now, if we take a skill like Freezing Arrow, which is a different skill entirely, and we look at Freezing Arrow has almost an exponential growth component. Freezing Arrow can do 1,980. All right, so let's take 1,980. Right, so 1,980 damage. We're also still doing 10,000 physical. So this is a similar. This is a situation where we are choosing between two skills. So we are a character who is set up. We have our damage. We have our 10,000 physical damage. I know it's a bullshit made up number. Excuse me, but that's fine. So in this situation, you can see that we have 10,000 damage plus 19,000 or 1,980. Right. On top of that, the 1,980 is AOE. And it also has an added component of being able to add additional cold damage in from other sources, which means that it can rise even higher than that. So as you can see, in any given scenario, if we are firing this ability, it is always going to be in our best interest to fire Freezing Arrow over Cold Arrow, even though Cold Arrow converts a large amount of our damage to cold, because we can potentially do more with this AoE than we can with this 5,300 cold damage. And that's only assuming that we can actually do that, which is get this much physical damage. In most situations, it actually looks more like this, which is where I can switch to a physical attack, and you'll see I have a total of 944 to 3,690 physical damage. However, that physical damage is not entirely physical, right? Because it's not converting elemental. So we're going to go ahead and remove all my elemental damage charms, because I have a whole bunch of those. And then we also have elemental damage coming from other sources. Of course, I'm on my my hacked character. I probably shouldn't have picked this particular character. Where's my other elemental damage coming from? I know I have elemental damage coming from other sources. Usually, if you take off enough pieces of equipment, your elemental damage just kind of disappears. Of course, in this particular case, I have the Holy Freeze Aura coming from ice. So if I swap over till the Holy Freeze Aura disappears, you'll see I have 683 actual physical damage, right? So 683 actual physical damage is what I'm looking at. And then, of course, I also have the Fanaticism Aura on a random piece of equipment. Ignore all this. This is my fireworks character. If you haven't seen my fireworks video, you should go check that out. But basically, what we're looking at here is a situation where we're basically not getting any real added damage to the equation. And this is a big issue. There's tons of these skills within the game. So, for instance, Cold Arrow is just one of them. Fire Arrow is another one. Magic Arrow is another one. Now, Magic Arrow tends to be relatively useful. And we'll talk about Magic Arrow, but we also, I think, need to talk about why Magic Arrow is maybe not the best skill in the game. It does. I think it needs a little bit of a bump. And also, it's surprisingly the Amazon has the most of these, which is also Lightning Bolt. Lightning Bolt is also a convert skill. And unfortunately, it is also what I consider to be a bad convert skill, which is a 100% convert skill. So these are the ones that generally tend to be the worst. On top of this, we also have other types of convert skills, like, for instance, the Assassin has one that is relatively ignored for the most part, and that is Fist of Fire. It is actually hidden, and it doesn't actually tell you that it does this, but Fist of Fire actually does convert physical damage into fire damage, and depending on what level you have the skill at, it actually will convert 100%, so you are actually punished for increasing the amount of points that you have in the ability. Honestly, I think physical is probably better off than fire in the grand scheme of things, unless you're actually building fire. But losing your life leech completely for the skill is definitely not good. On top of this, the Barbarian has a couple as well. So if we go take a look at the Barbarian has actually, I can't remember how many he has. I know he has Berserk. Now, for the sake of argument, and this is just something that I like to consider here, is I think, in my personal opinion, Berserk is fine. Berserk's entire goal is to essentially make your character weak, defenseless. So losing your life leech as part of that seems like a fantasy-related thing. So it seems important, I think, almost in my opinion, it seems important that Berserk actually does indeed work the way that it does. So in my opinion, conversion skills, at least the majority of them, are broken. But Berserk specifically, because it is set up as a reckless attack that increases damage and attack rating but decreases defense, and on top of that also removes your ability to life leech, I think Berserk is probably the one skill that actually works properly within the fantasy. Now, there are other skills, however, that also work within this interesting scheme, though, and I think that these skills in particular need to be fixed. Number one is Frenzy. Frenzy has a synergy on it, which basically allows it to gain damage. Both of these do, and I'm going to have to move myself out of the way because I can't show you the synergies without moving myself out of the way. I was trying to find a way to do that, but it wasn't working. All right, so when you look at Frenzy, what you'll see is that at the bottom it says Berserk gains plus 1% magic damage per level, right? So you would think in your mind that it works very similarly to the way that, like if I did 10,000 damage and I was gaining 1% per synergy, right? And I max out Berserk, then I'm supposedly getting a 1% per synergy, so that's 20 levels, so 20% magic damage added to my ability. So you would think it would look something like this, which is where I would then get an additional 2,000 magic damage added onto my physical attack for a grand total of 12,000 damage, 2,000 of that being magic. But that is not how it works. It actually works very similarly to the way that the original skill works, which is like this, which is where it converts 2,000 of the physical damage into magic, and then just simply rips that 2,000 physical damage away and gives you back the magic, which means that you gain only magic damage, not actually any additional damage onto the skill. Concentrate also has the same Berserk plus 1% magic damage per level, and also suffers from the same problem of not adding any additional damage to the skill. Now, I think this is a mistake. Conversion skills shouldn't just simply convert physical to elemental, because in the process they're not giving any additional damage. And because they're not giving any additional damage, they're not actually working, I think, properly the way that they were intended to work. How they should work is actually a completely different way, and I think what we can take a book from the Paladin. So the Paladin actually has a skill called Vengeance, and if I can, I can't remember if I've got a Vengeance Paladin offline. I might have to go online for Vengeance. But basically the way that Vengeance works is actually quite unique. It's not a conversion skill. It's actually something else entirely. And what it does is it actually causes the Paladin to gain damage based upon the physical damage that the Paladin is able to output. And we're just going to boot up the online version of the game so I can get access to the Vengeance Paladin, and we're going to show you what I mean. Now, Vengeance Paladins took me a long time to actually work out. I had to spend many hours doing research on the way that Vengeance worked, because Vengeance was just one of those abilities that just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. And it started to make sense, though, eventually. So once I managed to figure out some of the more intricate details of the way that the ability worked, I started to realize that, well, it actually wasn't really all that complicated. It was a lot like a conversion skill, except better. And what do I mean, except better? Well, if conversion just simply takes your physical damage and converts it into elemental damage, Vengeance takes your physical damage and actually uses it to determine how much elemental damage you will get, but doesn't take away your physical damage. So if I take a look at my regular attack right now, and I can try and remove all elemental damage sources, but I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to do that. Let's see, how many other elemental damage sources do I have? I've probably got a lightning charm. Okay. Another lightning charm. All right, so as you can see, I have 2,066 physical damage, right? When I switch to Vengeance, what you're going to notice is that Vengeance gives me fire, cold, and lightning. All right, so that's 3 elements. All of them are about 350 or 320 or whatever more each, right? So when I go and look at how much damage I do, you notice that it's 7,670, right? If you divided that into parts, you would get almost an equivalent amount of damage in all the elements. So if we take our 7,670 and we divided that by 4, we would get a total of about 917, which is about 2,000 damage per element, right? So in this particular case, you can clearly see that we haven't lost anything. There's no physical damage loss. There's no elemental damage loss. The Vengeance ability is simply adding the elemental damage directly to our attack and keeping the physical damage in place. Now, it does not enhance the physical damage. So his physical damage still stays the same. It stays at the original 2,000 damage that you saw when I took off all my equipment. But we're also gaining roughly about 1,917 elemental damage per ability, and this is of course a fully synergized. Actually, it's not even fully synergized, but it's about as good as I can get on the Vengeance Paladin because the synergy requirements are kind of crazy, and it definitely has a lot of damage output. The Vengeance skill does have its own issues, and I would like to address some of the issues of the Vengeance ability, namely its speed. It's a very slow ability. And it's also not an AoE ability like Zeal is, because Zeal obviously can attack a lot of targets really quickly. But that's for another video. Basically, what I'm proposing here is that all of the conversion skills, with the exception of Berserk, be modified to work like Vengeance as opposed to being conversion skills. This would fulfill the fantasy of the abilities a lot better. It would add that damage on top of the damage so that it would actually gain in single target damage, not lose, or rather stay the same. So in the case of, for instance, Ice Arrow, instead of adding 53% cold and then taking away 53% physical, my suggestion would be to simply just add 53% cold. Turn it into a Vengeance ability, or rather like this, which is where we have our 374% fire damage, 324% cold, etc., 384% lightning. This is essentially the way that it should work. And as you can clearly see, I'm only gaining about 2,000 damage per element. And in this particular case, with Cold Arrow, it should probably do more than what I'm getting in the case of like a multi-elemental attack. So in a multi-elemental attack like this, where I'm getting about 2,000 per element, the conversion skills should probably be putting out about, the full amount. So that would be about 6,000 for the one element. You kind of get what I'm saying, right? So if you have 3 elements and you have a total damage increase of 6,000, then you divide that. You divide it. So it gets divided by 3, which equals 2,000 per element. However, if you only have 1 element and you have a total of 6,000 damage added, then it would be straight to fire or straight to ice, etc., whatever it happens to be. And I think this is going to fix 2 things. All right. Number 1, it's going to fix Life Leech. Life Leech will actually work now. Number 2, it will fix Mana Leech. Mana Leech will actually work now. Number 3, it will allow Life Tap to work. So Life Tap will actually function. Number 4, it fixes the issue that we were talking about earlier, which is that it doesn't really add damage. So in this particular case, it will add damage. So it will actually add damage. Vengeance is a finicky skill, though. It doesn't get affected by a lot of other effects within the game. So converting all of these other abilities into a vengeance-like ability will have repercussions as well. You will need things like maximum damage charms to actually get the best effect out of these items, because the more damage that you can do, the more physical damage that you can do, the more elemental damage you get. To show you kind of how this works, if I switch to my regular melee ability, you'll notice that this little 3 max damage charm only gives me, 54 to 66, which is a total of what, let's see, is that 6, 12? So about 12, right? So it gives me about 12 damage for a 3 max damage charm, right? Well, when I pick this charm up while using Vengeance, as an example, I have 7,625, right? So I pick up this small fine charm, and I go from 25 to 70. I am getting a pretty huge amount of damage. What is that? 25, 35, 45. So about 45 damage for a plus 3 max damage charm, right? So 45 damage and AR I'm getting but with this. This is because the way that this works is that it allows physical damage to increase the amount of effect that you're getting. However, you cannot increase your physical damage outside of your weapon. So your weapon's the most important thing, and then you also have other sources of increasing your damage like maximum damage charms and things like that, but enhanced damage doesn't have an effect, like for instance fortitude. There are tons of different things in the game that do not affect the way that vengeance works. Grief does not affect the way that vengeance works, as an example. There are definitely some oddities within the way that the conversion abilities work, and also the way that this works. I'm not exactly sad that Grief wouldn't work with Vengeance or any of the conversion abilities, because Grief is already overused within Diablo 2 anyway. On top of this, it would open up other build possibilities with other weapons, which could potentially make for more interesting stuff. On top of that, most of the abilities that utilize conversion are not even in the realm of Grief. So, as an example, the Amazon's 3 abilities, which she has, the 3 conversion abilities that she runs, none of those are affected by Grief. So we can look at Cold Arrow. Obviously, Cold Arrow is not affected by Grief. Fire Arrow is not affected by Grief. And on top of that, we can also look at Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt would not be affected by Grief. On top of that, we also have Fists of Fire from the Assassin. So Fists of Fire is another conversion ability which would be affected by this. And Fists of Fire also, likewise, would not be affected by Grief, because you can't really use Grief with claw skills. So again, not really going to hurt. The only character that would lose some grief damage in the process with this would be the Barbarian. And only the Barbarian in the case of Frenzy and Concentration. And this is just only if they are utilizing that portion of the Berserk skill. So it's very important to note that the way that this would work is it would not take away any damage. It would only prevent Berserk's magic damage from stealing physical damage, which would not even really be an issue. And it would just simply add that physical damage as magic damage instead. So Frenzy and Concentrate would both get additional magic damage instead of replacing their physical damage with magic damage. Berserk wouldn't get touched at all in my proposition here, because quite honestly, I think Berserk fulfills its fantasy quite well. It does exactly what it's supposed to do. It takes away your ability to life leech. It takes away your ability to mana leech. It makes you a weak but very powerful, just smashing machine, because it converts all of your physical damage into the magic damage, which allows you to just like power through things. Last but not least is the Magic Arrow. So Magic Arrow is an oddity that actually kind of works. I don't know what to say about Magic Arrow other than it does have its usefulness. It actually outclasses both Cold Arrow and Fire Arrow. If you have ever in your life considered to use Fire Arrow or Cold Arrow, chances are you probably found out that Magic Arrow was superior. And it really just comes down to the fact that magic arrow is magic damage, and magic damage has no resistances, and so you can focus your whole heart into building your physical damage as opposed to building elemental damage, right? So because they all three of these essentially work the same way by converting physical damage to an elemental damage source, and all three of these are, basically exactly the same, with the exception of a little bit of additional cold damage and a little bit of additional fire damage added with Fire Arrow. They're basically the same exact skill. The real difference, however, is that Cold Arrow and Fire Arrow continually increase in mana cost. Well, they used to. I think they actually fixed that. Yeah, they fixed it. And Magic Arrow decreases, and eventually gets to the point where it hits 0. So if you build Magic Arrow, you get 55, you can see 53, 55, and 53. They're all pretty much the same. Now, I do think Magic Arrow would also benefit from this, of adding the actual magic damage to the shot instead of converting. I don't think it would cause any real damage here, just giving the same amount of magic damage in addition as opposed to a conversion. So all three of these could probably get the same treatment with relative ease, and it wouldn't cause any of them any harm. Magic Arrow doesn't really do a ridiculously significant amount of damage anyway. None of these do. Fire Arrow, Magic Arrow, and Cold Arrow, which are all single target, have a huge problem exceeding the amount of damage that you can potentially get out of things like Exploding Arrow and Freezing Arrow, and even the lowly Ice Arrow exceeds the amount of damage that you can get from Cold Arrow significantly. So I don't see anything wrong with allowing these to actually have some single target damage output, because these will always be superior in AoE, always. And these could potentially actually be decent in single target. That's the really only thing that these are going to be good for, is single target damage. Now, if they function the way that Vengeance does, they may also allow the Amazon to bypass physical immunities, which could actually make them want to build them and use them. As it is right now, nobody uses them. Nobody uses Cold Arrow. Nobody uses Fire Arrow. Even when I'm leveling up and Amazon, you can go back on some of my ladder starts, and you can look at some of my earlier, like Freezing Arrow ladder start. Cold Arrow is a pain in the butt to even use to level up, because it just doesn't add enough damage to any attack. It's basically like running around using your regular normal attack. And that's really just the gist of it, is that because it is nothing more than converting one element to another, all you're really doing is gaining nothing. And I think that's the biggest negative here across the board on these skills, is that you are essentially gaining nothing. And then to speak on the last topic, which is the ones that convert everything. So with Berserk, it's fine because it's in the fantasy of the way that Berserk works. But this ability, Lightning Bolt, it's I think I played around with this one time just for fun. I got like the highest damage ethereal javelin that I could. Stacked physical damage like to the moon. Like to the moon and back. Could not make this ability work. Like I could not. And it's really kind of sad because it's just a dead ability. This ability outclasses it by miles. Any of these abilities, even Power Strike, outclasses Lightning Bolt by miles. It costs mana, and it has a 100% conversion, which means you can't even keep firing it because you can't mana leech. If Lightning Bolt was given the Vengeance treatment and switched to the way that Vengeance works, I feel like it would be mildly useful. Maybe as a single target ability. It might outclass Lightning Fury in single target damage. And that's really the only thing that it would be good for, is single target. And even in that situation, and this is kind of sad, is that I feel like Lightning Bolt would still get outclassed by Charged Bolt anyway, Charge Strike anyway. But at least giving it this treatment of switching it to the Vengeance-like ability would allow people to actually get some usefulness out of it. Number one, it would allow people to actually, steal life, steal mana. You could actually throw it multiple times. I think another big issue with this ability is the fact that it is entirely elemental, which a lot of the times when you play a lightning Amazon, you're having issues with this kind of stuff anyway. Like, obviously there's lightning immunes all over the place, and you've got an ability here that just doesn't even do physical, right? So it's not even it's not even worth throwing it at the monsters that are immune to lightning. You'd be better off using one of these physical abilities over here. So I think lightning bolt would greatly be affected by this. All of these abilities, lightning bolt, cold arrow, magic arrow, fire arrow, frenzy, concentration, and fists of fire, all use the conversion effect, and all of them are subpar. I'd like to see them brought back into the fold and actually become useful again. Magic arrow is the only one out of the entire lot which is useful. It is very useful. Frenzy, of course, is useful without the conversion, but with the conversion, it actually makes Frenzy worse, not better, because it's a 20-point investment that literally doesn't even add additional damage. It just converts existing damage into, non-physical, which is okay. I mean, I guess if you get like a little bit of conversion to non-physical, but I mean, it's not really all that amazing. Magic Arrow is really the only one that really shines in this department, along with, I'd say, Berserk, because Berserk is specifically counting on those negatives to make it into a push-pull scenario, a kiss-curse. Is that what the Diablo devs called it? Kiss-curse. Berserk is a kiss-curse scenario, which is where they're giving you a big boon, but you're getting a curse in the process, which is you are defensively weak and have no life leech and mana leech, right? So to recap, conversion elemental skills generally suck. Fists of Fire, Cold Arrow, Fire Arrow, Frenzy, Lightning Bolt, and Berserk are generally bad. With the exception of Berserk. Berserk is the only one that is actually good to be bad, right? It is bad for the same reason that these are bad, but it is bad with a reason, right? It's good to be bad. So Berserk is the only one that is good to be bad. Whereas all the other ones are kind of meh. Only one of these abilities actually works properly, and that is Magic Arrow. And even that is a little subpar. It's not exactly the most amazing. It works. When you find a physically immune monster, you can use it to kill the physically immune monster, but it's not really the greatest thing in the world. Conversion of physical damage to an elemental source has a lot of issues. Life Leech no longer works, Mana Leech no longer works, Life Tap no longer works, or at a diminished rate, right? It does not actually add damage to the ability. It is simply converting damage, not actually adding damage. And this is an issue because most skills in the game, in fact, pretty much all skills in the game, add damage in some way. And this means that the skills are already subpar to any other ability that does add damage because they are not. An example is, there's a couple examples here, but we're doing a recap. So, the general gist of it is that if we changed it to a vengeance-like ability, and we made it so that it was actually adding the damage instead of, taking it away and then putting it back as a different element, like vengeance does, it would actually increase the damage of the ability. So if we have 10,000 and we add 20%, it gives us 2,000, and we end up with actual 12,000 damage. So we actually have a gain in damage. Doing this, like Vengeance, with 3 elements is 6,000 damage total, but divided by 3, which is about 2,000 damage per element. If we have one element, we could say that fire or ice, like for instance fire or ice arrow, could potentially do 6,000 additional damage because you're converting your 2,000 into more, right? So the entire goal here would be to make a very powerful single target hit. Converting it to a physical damage skill like Vengeance, as opposed to the conversion skills like Ice Arrow and Fire Arrow, would fix Life Leech, it would fix Mana Leech, it would fix Life Tap working. It would also add damage. It would actually add damage instead of just simply taking it away and putting it back as a different element. In general, I think that this is the route to go. Vengeance is one of the only skills in the game that actually works properly when it comes to converting physical damage to elemental damage, because it doesn't do it the way that these skills do. It does it the way that it does. Vengeance is a very unique ability in the game. And being able to add elemental damage instead of just simply converting elemental damage is a very interesting way to go about it. I think that's pretty much it. If you guys have any comments on this, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. This is something that's been bugging me for a long time because I've always wanted to make a, like a fire arrow sorceress or a cold arrow sorcerer. I mean, I'm sorry, Amazon, cold arrow Amazon, or even like a concentrate with like full berserk barbarian. But a lot of the stuff, when you actually dig into it and you actually look at it, what you realize is that, well, they just don't work. They get outclassed by everything. Every single other ability in the game outclasses Fire Arrow and Cold Arrow. Every single other ability in the game outclasses Lightning Bolt. These are dead skills that basically nobody uses. Even when leveling up, Fire Arrow and Cold Arrow are essentially trash. Even when leveling up, Lightning Bolt is trash. There's really no good usefulness for a lot of these skills. And I'd like to hear what you guys have to think about my idea of essentially turning that into a vengeance-like ability. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching, and I hope that you're enjoying this new series. Be sure to hit the like button if you're enjoying the series so that I know. And as always, keep watching.